And a hearty welcome to one and all. You're listening to episode 12 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank last week's guest, Jen Hayden, who was terrific. We had, as you know, a very wide-ranging conversation, which I split into 3 parts. And I look forward to having her on again because we both had a lot of fun, and I have a feeling that you all had a lot of fun too. So don't forget, whether you're joining me on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or on my YouTube channel, please click the like button and smash that subscriber bell. So it's not really a stretch to say that I grew up in a house, yes, in Massapequa, but a good chunk of my childhood, my young childhood, was spent in a bowling alley. And that bowling alley was Woodmere Bowling Lanes and Backstage Club in the 5 Towns, Long Island. For those who don't know, Woodmere and the 5 Towns, which is Woodmere, Hewlett, Inwood, Long Beach, and Cedarhurst. It's good that I remember that. It's about as far west and south as you can go while still being on Long Island. You could pretty much walk to Cambria Heights. That's the translation of that. So my grandfather owned that bowling alley and the nightclub that was there, which is still there to this day. Backstage Club is still thriving. I'm friendly with the owners of today. So I started bowling very young. There is even a picture of me on social media in front of Lane 20 at Woodmere Lanes in 1974. And my dad is holding me up, kind of propping me, using me as a prop, but in a good way, holding me in front of Lane 20. And he's got a big smile on his face. And that's the picture that I use when I let people know that, yeah, my grandfather owned a bowling alley, because I found for my entire life, up to this point, most people, their instant reaction is they're skeptical. Because, let's be honest, you go your whole life and not have someone tell you that a family member owned a bowling alley, just based on statistics. Remember, I am a statistician. It's very unlikely that you're going to meet somebody who says, oh yeah, family owned a bowling alley. My grandfather owned a bowling alley. I own a bowling alley. Very unlikely. So I started bowling very young, and I don't really know if I necessarily had a particular talent for it, or if I just got to practice a lot. And I don't remember this that well. I remember flashes, but whenever I was there, and I spent one day a week with Grandma and Grandpa, my dad's parents, who lived in Rockville Center, North Village Avenue, just a little bit, north of the Rockville Center Long Island Railroad Station. In fact, you could get a site on their apartment building from the train station. And I was the kind of kid that doesn't seem like much, but that was a big deal. If I was traveling by train with my parents or with just my dad, when we would get to Rockville Center, I would get excited because, hey, that's where Grandma and Grandpa live. I was very close to them both. And one day a week, I would spend with Grandma and Grandpa. And I went to the bowling alley pretty frequently. And Grandpa wasn't necessarily the biggest personality, but he always had a twinkle in his eye. And he would set me up on one of the lanes and just let me bowl. I learned how to keep score by the time I was 5. Again, a little bit of a different sort of a kid, differently abled. There were things that I was incredibly skilled at. Shouldn't really have been able to keep score in bowling that young, but I was. But then there was other stuff where, all right, we got to help him out here. We don't want him to get, too frustrated. So I did a lot of bowling as a younger person. And then when I was 6, Grandma and Grandpa moved to Florida. Grandpa sold his shares in the business, both businesses, and he moved away. Now that didn't stop me from bowling, but it stopped me from bowling for free and getting free food whenever I was at his place of business. So when you're young, when you're that young, you don't realize how good you have it. And it never hit me just how fortunate I was. Unlimited bowling, unlimited burgers, pizza, French fries, Coca-Cola. Sorry, Mom, I wasn't supposed to have Coca-Cola. Every now and then, Grandpa would be a little bit of a rule breaker. Don't tell your mother. I said it's okay. Don't worry about it. And my grandmother used to spoil me rotten. The cliche of the Jewish grandma. She wasn't a stereotype. She was a prototype. So, with all of that, and then moving away, it was an adjustment for me. But I continued to bowl a lot. And Massapequa, at the time, had 2 bowling alleys. Well, one was technically in Massapequa Park, but the bowling alley that was closest to where I grew up, which is known as Massapequa Bowl, which we just called Pequa Bowl, is still there. It's just off of the bottom of Route 107, where Route 107 ends at Merrick Road, but it's right there. And that was a 2.5 block walk from home. But most of my time and most of the serious bowling that I did as I grew up was done at the other bowling alley, which was on Sunrise Highway, Route 27, in Pequa Park, not that far from the Sunrise Mall, and very close to the Massapequa Park Long Island Railroad station. That bowling alley, sadly, has gone the way of the dodo. It does not exist anymore. That was a good alley. It was, I want to say, 64 lanes on 2 floors. I'm not sure about 64 lanes, but it was a 2-level house, whereas Woodmere was just 20 lanes on 1 floor. And they had 300 bowled with us, able to run a lot of different leagues, and often you had 2 packed leagues at the same time. And when you add in food and booze and other kind of, they used to run in the men's leagues and the women's leagues where you would put extra money into the kitty to, high game. They seem to be doing really well. But I bowled in a lot of leagues at both of those establishments, Pequa Bowl and 300 Bowl. And I kept up with it. This wasn't something that was a passing fancy. I was a good bowler. Did I enjoy it? See, this is where it gets tricky. I had a hilariously bad disposition and temper. And not really proud to say that kicking the crap out of the ball return was my MO when things didn't go so well for me. Now, a lot of people who golf will say that you almost have to be good at golf to really lose your shit when things go wrong. And one way that I describe bowling to people, because almost everybody that I've met who is either in my age bracket, or we can even talk about younger people, most people have some experience bowling, just whether it's going with friends or a birthday party or what have you. I've come to the conclusion, after a lifetime of study, that bowling is the most fun for people who suck at bowling. It's almost counterintuitive, but the better you are, the more frustrating it is, the angrier you're going to get when things don't go your way. But if you are awful and your whole night comes down to whether or not you rolled 1 strike and you're going to celebrate and buy drinks for everybody in the surrounding areas, that's when bowling is fucking blast. So as I grew up and grew older, I bowled, and you could chart my improvement year to year. And by the time I was in 10th grade, I was averaging about a 170, which, even today where scoring is pretty much out of control, it's still good. It would still be, okay, this guy can bowl. My best year, my peak, if you want to call it that, coincided with my emotional and psychological my most ruinous period, where I was the most self-destructive, the most disagreeable, the angriest, and missed a shit ton of days of school. I still don't understand how I graduated on time, but, you know, that's all been lost to history now. When I was in 11th grade, I had the third highest average in Nassau County, Long Island, for those who don't know. And I will say that it was very exciting when I got the news that by having the third highest average, I qualified personally to travel to Vestal, which is not far from Binghamton, to compete in the state finals. It was a bit of a feather in the cap. And as aggravated as I always was back then, because I had started to form friendships, got along with everybody who was on the bowling team, and even people from other towns that we competed with and against. So it was possible for me to form friendships, but I was very, very depressed. I was very lonely because no girl would like me. You know the drill. And it's certainly not just me. It's difficult, teen angst. It's real. It was real back then. It's even realer now. But I remember how proud my parents were. You know, my schoolwork was shit. I was flunking almost every class. But at least there was something I was good at. At least I showed aptitude, and I did work at this. You know, bowling was mostly fun. It was fun when I wasn't missing 3 or 4 spares in a row and kicking the shit out of the ball return. I don't even know how I got away with that for as long as I did. Like, why didn't they ban me from competing? Like, you kick the ball return one more time, you're out of here. Nothing. I don't know. Permissive era, you know? They just let you do anything. Yeah, 1991 and 1990, they let you do anything. But I was excited, and in the second week of March in 1991, the week after Del Ballard Jr.'s famous gutter ball, for you bowling fans out there, and for those who know what I'm talking about, they're laughing right now, and for those who don't, Google Del Ballard Jr. gutter ball. That famous moment, one of the most famous or infamous moments in the history of bowling, took place the week before I went upstate. So we had a chartered Greyhound. It wasn't Greyhound, but it was a chartered Greyhound bus. And what was a huge help to me, again, I was very shaky. I was a big kid. You know, I had this absurd mullet. But it was difficult to meet new people, to not stare at the ground. And somebody on the Massapequa bowling team, Danny Pearl, he was on the trip as well, because he ended up with, I believe, the second best average in Nassau County. He had a 181. I had like a 180.5. And the top guy, Scotty, who I didn't know and I met on the trip, and then oddly enough worked out with him at Bev's gym a number of years later. He had like a 183, 184, but he was a freak. He was 13 years old and he had the highest average in Nassau County. That ain't normal. Like, he was an incredible bowler. But I digress. The trip was a learning experience in every possible way. And this is why I will always have a soft spot for bowling, even though I didn't go as far as I hoped. Because I had fantasies about, please, you know what? I'm not going to say don't judge me. Judge me all you want. Light me up in the comments. But when I was a kid and people would ask me what I was going to do when I grew up, I said with a straight face, I want to be a professional bowler. Earl Anthony. Next to Muhammad Ali, my number one sports hero, Earl Anthony. And again, the people who know bowling are laughing right now, and the people who know me are saying, that's right, he's a lefty, and Earl was a lefty. I maintain to this day, I love Walter Ray Williams Jr., I love PDW. Earl Anthony was the greatest bowler who ever lived. Hands down. But I wanted to be a professional bowler. In order to have any kind of a chance, I would have had to continue to improve at the same rate until college. The trip upstate on the bus was actually a lot of fun, surprisingly. And our way to Vestal. We had a decent hotel. It was like a Radisson. It wasn't, the Waldorf, but it was not Motel 6. It was not, I hate to say it, it wasn't a hotel where there's, people of ill repute running around, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It was a nice hotel. And it was one of the first times in my life that I was pretty much on my own and left to my own devices. Now, yeah, there were rules. There were chaperones that were kind of keeping track of us. But four of us, Danny and me, and a couple of the women who were on the trip, young women who were bowlers for other schools, we just went to an Applebee's or a Chili's or a Fridays. I'm not sure which one it was. But we just made our own decision. I was 17 and not used to this kind of, level of decision making that I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm going to go out. We're going out to dinner with friends here. So we went out. We had like fried shrimp and French fries, like the most. I mean, it was tasty, but not exactly the healthiest thing. I got like the worst thing on the menu. Then later that night, we went bowling. Like it's so stupid and so obvious that we're on a bowling trip and the state finals are the next day. And what do? The night before, we go bowling. And what I remember is I bowled well, and many of the other people from the other schools, like this bowling alley, wherever it was in Vestal, it had at least 100 lanes. It was a humongous bowling alley. Like some of the Bolero locations on Long Island, you see where it is massive. So we bowled, and I remember standing outside and somebody mentioning, it was preseason baseball was going on, and the Yankees had lost 95 games the previous year, and somebody said, hey, the Yankees won their first preseason game. I don't know why I remember that. Then we started talking Yankees and how they had sucked the previous year. Anyway, we get back to the hotel, and without belaboring the point, I had basically my first intense sexual experience with one of the women that we had gone to dinner with. And you can take it easy. We didn't have sex, but we fooled around well beyond anything that I had experienced. I had kissed one girl in 1988 when I was 14. What a stud, right? This was much more intense. There was some contact. And I got to be honest, just that made the trip worthwhile. It was the most fun and exciting experience that I had had up to that point in my life, and I was already 17. I was almost old enough to enlist in the military, for crying out loud. And wow, this is amazing. This is amazing. This is possible? This is real? Because I had already, at that point, started to believe this is not possible, this is not real. So, paired off with this young lady, she was actually a year older than me. And we just had, it was just fucking great. It was so much fun. Nobody was going to get hurt. Nobody was doing anything that the other one didn't want to be done. And the next day was literally the 1991 New York State High School bowling finals. And my mom drove up from Massapequa. My dad drove from, well, he was in Woodbury at the time. And my aunt was there. Dad picked up my aunt. And other people had family members. So the idea was we were going to bowl a total of 6 games. We were going to bowl 3 games in the morning, and then we were going to swap sides and bowl 3 games in the afternoon. Now, I was only 17, but I was already having problems with my thumb. And people who bowl regularly, this is something that you need to worry about, and something that is always on your mind, especially if you're bowling a lot of games. It doesn't take much for your bowling thumb to swell up, and heaven forbid, break the skin. You might not be able to bowl. So I had two bowling balls, and I would alternate depending on lane conditions. Like I was advanced enough to do that. But I was starting to have this thing where I could only bowl at my peak for 2 games at a time, and then my thumb would swell and the ball would start to stick. And no matter what I did, I could not stop it from happening. Maybe now there's some kind of a compound that I would be adding. I was 17. There's no Google. I didn't have any means to order something. Either you got something at the pro shop or you didn't, were your choices back then. So the first 3 games, I bowled very well, but neither I nor our all-star team, the Nassau County All-Stars, we were not really in contention. We were going to have to like shoot 250s in the afternoon. But I bowled well, and I remember my dad saying, you probably should have scored higher. You got some bad breaks, but you didn't crack. You made all your spares. So in 3 games, I shot about a 600 series, and I think I had 2 open frames in the 3 games. And I left a lot of, kind of what we call taps, where you put the ball in the pocket or close to it, and, if you're a lefty, you leave a 7-pin or a 10-pin, but I covered all the spares. I bowled really well. But you looked at the leaderboard, and there were people on other all-star teams that shot 680 series, 700. So unless I shot a 300 or something insane, I was not going to be in contention for any of the big awards. And came back in the afternoon and, stretched, got myself ready, and started practicing. And my thumb began to swell immediately. And I knew that I was done. I should have just basically sat out, because it was at least 30% larger than it should have been. And neither of those bowling balls were useless, because no matter what I did, ball was going to stick in my hand and I was going to have no control. I was just going to have to kind of bluff my way through. So after shooting, 600 plus in the first 3 games, which again is not spectacular for a 180 average, but it's good. And I bowled so badly in those 3 games, I shot about a 430 series. And for someone like me who was prideful, I wasn't prideful in other areas, but when it came to this, when it came to bowling, I took a lot of pride in it, and I always wanted to compete at the highest level, and I certainly didn't want to embarrass myself in front of my family. But I was so frustrated, the fact that I had no touch, and I just could not get anything going, because people who bowl know this, the ball stuck, and you hear that terrible sound. It almost sounds like a wine bottle opening, like a cork popping. So I shot like a 160 and a 150, and I don't even think I got a 130 in the last game. It was an utter catastrophe. Now, it didn't eliminate us. We weren't going to win anything anyway, but I wanted to at least have a good showing. If I could have shot a 1,200 over 6 games, it would have been a feather in the cap. Hey, you know what? The state finals, you showed up. I showed up for 3 games, and then that was it. So after that trip, I continued to bowl. And I should point out that the young lady that I kind of partnered up with on that trip was a friend, but nothing else happened with her. Like, it's not like we had this thing and then all of a sudden she's my girlfriend. No. That was pretty much it. Like, we just had this one weekend, wink, wink, and even then nothing that crazy happened. But it didn't go anywhere. It's not like it was a springboard or a jumping off point. And unfortunately, whatever momentum that may have derived for me, I wasn't able to translate into anything. And I just went back to being the same kind of morose and depressive type of personality. And I was in therapy at the time, but didn't necessarily put me in a better frame of mind. But I've always and am always and will always be grateful for that experience, because even though, yes, it was terrible that I bowled so badly, and it would be a very long time before I would get with another girl, even in that context, even in not getting all the way, but just the experience of it. You know, it was so rare for me. This was only the second girl I ever kissed, right? I'm always and will always be grateful to bowling for allowing that to happen. You know, and if you want to look at a life in full, somebody looking down and saying the reason why his grandfather owned the bowling alley was so that he would bowl and he would get to go upstate and compete in the state finals when he was 17. I don't have a problem looking at it that way. That's fine. If that was why, I'm okay with it. You know, you don't throw it back. And I continue to bowl, but the weird thing, I was very overweight up to and including and through my 11th grade year. I was heavy, but my balance on the lanes was impeccable. I never looked off balance. And there is video of me, again, on social media of me bowling in that era, right around the time of the trip upstate. And I look like a kid who really knows what he's doing. My shot making was smooth as long as my thumb was good. And I always appeared to have an idea of what I was doing, the moving around the lanes, but I never staggered after throwing the ball. As a senior in high school, I lost a lot of weight. And I never had the same command. I never had the same balance after that. There's video of me bowling in 12th grade having lost like 40 to 50 pounds, and I am just staggering all over the lanes. I'm just so off balance. So my dreams of becoming a professional bowler were dashed. They weren't realistic dreams. But it was still difficult to accept that now you're not going to be able to do this for a living. You're still a good bowler, but you're probably never going to average 200, and that's okay. Because statistically speaking, the odds of becoming a professional bowler and making money, not so good. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but they're not so good. But I'm grateful, of course, for my grandfather, who was he was a guy with a good sense of humor, but I would not call him a humorous man. And he isn't the kind of person that you would have expected that his the latter half of his professional life, because he was a machinist first, but the latter half of his professional life was based upon games. They had pinball machines, old school video games, pool, billiards, in the nightclub, and bowling. And he said that they made a mint with the birthday parties. And that's something that picked up in the 70s. He said, Junior, you wouldn't believe what we make and how lucrative. It's unbelievable how many people would come in there with their kids and have birthday parties. And they, sometimes they would even ask us to get the cake. It was the easiest money ever. It was just so good. But Grandpa, his livelihood was centered around games and fun. And the only problem, the one thing he told me, because I asked him, I said, what's the worst thing that you found running a bowling alley? And he said, you're not going to believe this. The only negative to this job in this life is the number of parents who ask you whether or not their kid needs bowling shoes. That's it. You're thinking, Grandpa, that doesn't sound like very much. He says, no. You try listening to the same question 30 times every day, Junior. You try that. Oh, okay. Yes, your son needs shoes. Yes, your daughter has to wear bowling shoes. Everyone has to wear them. He's only 3. Well, then he's not going to bowl. Must have bowling shoes. 5 cents. Whatever it was back then. I want to thank you all for joining me on this trip down memory lane, another trip down memory lane, but not about movies, but about me and family and bowling. Don't forget to click like and subscribe on whatever platform you've joined my chat today on. And I look forward to seeing you all again real soon. This has been episode 12 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. Peace.